We were already aware of, environmental concerns and stuff like that, but I think the trigger were the kids. They were not critical, but they were asking questions about why do we do that, and is cattle really good for the environment? And we decided that there's one sentence that we actually wrote down, which is, we want to produce cattle that they'd be proud to eat. Sylvie and Christophe Bur, we run a beef cattle operation near Maryborough in Queensland. We started by saying, okay, we've got to establish our carbon account. We couldn't produce what the cattle produced. We couldn't reduce, for example, electricity and stuff like that, so we completely solar, totally. But at the end of the day, we really had to find ways to sequester carbon. That was the shining light, get to carbon neutrality. To do that, we just started looking at the ERF, the Emission Reductions Fund, which is the governance body that actually regulates the carbon credit scheme. So to actually be issued carbon credit that proves that you actually have sequestered carbon, you need to run a method, an ERF approved method, which is actually law. Follow that method and then you're issued carbon credits that you can then use for whatever you want. So we started looking at methods. We looked at feeding nitrate supplements to cattle. We looked at avoided clearing of native vegetation. We looked at soil carbon, and we looked at beef herd management in detail. Many other methods, but those ones were the ones that are applicable to us. Beef nitrate supplements didn't work simply because the nitrate supplements never made it to the market. So the intention was that if you feed those supplements to cattle, it reduces their methane emissions. There's a lot of new options for that now. It's a field of research which is exploding. Well, hopefully we're going to see a commercial product applicable to grazing very soon. Then we looked at avoided clearing. We looked at it first through a carbon service provider. We were too small for them. So the avoided clearing is basically you have an area of native vegetation that you could clear and put to pasture, and you're actually not doing that. You're actually keeping the trees and keeping the trees growing to sequester that carbon into the trees. So you need to figure out how much carbon you do have in your trees, which is done using a computer program, FullCam. So we had to learn how to do that. To actually register a project, you have to map where your project is going to be in a very precise fashion. You have to exclude dams, exclude houses, exclude laneways and power line easement and stuff like that. So it has to be done in a special geographic format. Also that we had to do our carbon account in the first place, so we had to learn carbon accounting. To make sure that we did understand it well and we actually had the skills to do things properly, we went through formal training. So that was the avoided clearing project. But on top of it, we wanted to put biodiversity benefits. We had gotten a lot more sophisticated in our thinking about sustainability, and it got beyond carbon neutrality. We wanted essentially to produce beef that is sustainable. And by sustainable, I mean we could do what we do forever, and it would not take any resources away from the planet and from nature. It goes beyond carbon. It means that we have to maintain that in the way it used to be, which is what the Land Restoration Fund is about, is a Queensland initiative, and I'm sure there's the same in every state, that actually pays you for attaching those core benefits, biodiversity, vegetation conditions, etc., to a carbon project. The business case for us was, do we clear that land and put cattle on it, or do we hope that carbon farming will give us the same income? Because it's all great to be carbon neutral, but at the end of the day we also have to make a living. So that was the balance for us. Do we devote a significant part of the farm, about 25%, to carbon farming, or do we clear it and put cattle on it? That was the big equation. At this point in time, whether we put cattle or we farm carbon is just as profitable. But the carbon farming, of course, has benefits for the planet, so it's a no-brainer decision. As much as avoided clearing is an absolute no-brainer, as long as it makes sense financially, and it does make sense. Soil carbon is a little bit more complicated. There are costs associated with implementing a soil carbon project, so it's real cash out, and the benefits are a lot more fickle. Sequestering carbon in a tree is easy. The tree grows, and that's it. So unless it burns down, unless there's an event and you've got a wildfire, etc., unless you lose that tree, the carbon's here. Carbon in soil goes up and down. When there's rainfall and the beautiful grass pushes roots into the soil, it stores carbon. But if there's a drought, immediately the microbes eat that carbon and release it into the atmosphere. So it goes up and down, and it's very fickle, and it's very hard to guarantee that you're going to have a result. We've done all the math and looked at all the evidence, and we think that all in all, we will be able to make it work financially. You get the benefits from carbon farming and sequestering carbon, which is great for the planet. Even if it's not worth financially because of the cost associated with it, you create profitability benefits in your cattle operation. By that I mean, if you look after your pasture well, if you plant legumes, if you make sure that you don't overgraze, all that is good for soil carbon. But it happens to be also good for cattle. We use the credits that we generate in 3 ways. Keep a part for us and to be carbon neutral. And that means you go to the ERF and you say, I want to cancel those carbon credits. This carbon has been stored and it's here to offset. That's where carbon neutrality is about. Then you're left with another set of offsets, which you can do whatever you want with. There are many ways to sell those offsets. One, which is to sell to the government, to the ERF themselves. One, which is to sell on the spot market, which is you sell them to whomever wants it. Typically, energy companies, airlines buy those offsets to offset their own emissions, which is why we've chosen to generate some funds from those extra offsets that we have by selling them to the Queensland government. Where we are now is what we call stage 1. We're just as profitable as we were. We sequester carbon in the trees, right? And we, at current carbon prices, we can generate funds to go to stage 2. And stage 2 is we sequester carbon in the trees and in the soil. We are still profitable, and we generate biodiversity benefits. So has it been worthwhile? Yes, it has. Even where we are now, we haven't done stage 2 yet, but even where we are now, still profitable, and we have carbon credits to be carbon neutral in both cases. My advice to anyone who wants to try, and everybody should, is talk to your network, find someone who is ready to explain to you what it takes. Whether it's a carbon service aggregator, whether it's a friend, whether it's any advisor that you can find someone who can actually explain it to you. There are lots of resources now. Sites like FarmLab, like Zeebra Lab. Look-See as well is a really good resources, and all that is free. You can have a good handle on what does your property look like from a carbon perspective from those tools. Start the journey. It'll be a bit of a discovery. When you look at the result, it's absolutely worth it.